The D&D book Mythic Odysseys of Theros contains a map of the plane. We see the three major poleis, Akros, Meletis and Setessa, in the middle of the map. In the north lies the Minotaur city of Skofos. Today, however, we want to focus on the little green area in the east, Skola Vale. The valley provides plenty of food and drink to its inhabitants. Legend has it Nylea came across the valley and loved its beauty so much she blessed the land so it would flourish forever. This gave rise to legends such as Kaxos Raxos, the braided lion, which is probably a Jani, and Hope, the pork bird, an animal that made for an exquisite feast. Nylea's blessing took the form of emptying her wineskin onto the land. When wild valley goats drank some of the blessed wine, they became the Satyrs of Theros. Their basic needs for food and drink were provided for by the valley, so satyrs were free to follow their hedonistic lifestyle, pursuing pleasure. They regard honor and righteousness as useless terms if everyone ends up in the same underworld anyhow. Or as satyrs would say, taste the world before Erebos rips your tongue out. They think other races are burdened with the plague of seriousness. Life is a gift from the gods, and satyrs want to live and experience life with all their senses. Satyrs are generally thought of as being fun-loving and good-spirited, very social and unrestrained. They are generous to others when it suits their own plans, but quickly turn to cruelty if someone acts against their personal enjoyment or ambitions. Also note that some satyrs align themselves with the polis to fight for, made clear in-game by a more combat-oriented creature type like soldier or archer. Dawngreets are satyrs that have left the Skola Vale to spread the philosophy of hedonism. These Dawngreets are storytellers, explorers and diplomats. An example of a Dawngreet appears in the story The Path or the Horizon. The protagonist of this story, Zosimos, comes across a satyr who tells him his garden is full of weeds, meaning he worries too much. The satyr goes on to explain that humans are missing the point of life and cling to insubstantial concepts like glory. A hero is someone who allows others to experience the world. After the encounter, Zosimos is drawn away from his journey to Meletis. He travels to the east, likely to Skola Vale. Nylea's Favoured have a simple task in theory: protecting the Skola Vale. Protection from external factors means multiple things. They support populations of wild beasts on the borders of the Vale for defensive measures. They aid the growing of thick underbrush so outsiders have a harder time entering the valley. Then there is also protection needed from internal factors. After a rough night of partying where little thought was given to the environment, Nylea's Favoured are tasked with regrowing nature, where fires broke out or where grass turned to mud by hours of dancing. Besides Xenagos, the few authority figures satyrs have are named Sibyls, seers of the future. They are named after the various Sibyls in Greek mythology, all the women who told prophecies. The oldest satyr Sibyl is a grey-furred woman named Kresa, who insists that she can see farther into the future the more she drinks. Sibyls are responsible for sending Dawngreets out into the world, warning the community of danger, and overseeing the initiation rites for the Cult of Horns. So far the satyrs seem pretty reasonable goat people who just want to have a good time and might push against what one might consider morally sound. However, the Cult of Horns gives us the first glimpse that it's not all sunshine and roses. When a non-satyr spends time partying without consequence in the Skola Vale, they might get an invite to the Cult of Horns. If they accept, the non-satyr gets a crown of broken horns and is named a stub. Stubs undergo hazing rituals, where they have to do degrading tasks until the satyrs grow bored of them. The stub awakes the next morning alone in the mountains surrounding the Vale. Most former stubs never tell of their experience, out of shame. There are also tales of Bakkeia, more perverted revels, a tradition some satyrs claim was abandoned years ago. These feasts might start tame, but end with madness, sacrifice, violence, desecration and defilement. These rituals are usually held in the caves below the Skola Vale. The hedonism ascribed to satyrs is the standard everyday idea of what hedonism is. Seeking out pleasure while disregarding the well-being of oneself and others. This interpretation is called folk hedonism and is not a philosophical theory in itself, but rather parts of different theories on hedonism combined with a lack of foresight. While we are no Philosophia, here's a very quick introduction on hedonism. Philosophy on a Greek-inspired plane? I know, right? Here we go. Hedonism as a theory identifies pleasure and pain as the only elements of importance. Pleasure is valuable, pain is not. Value hedonism breaks every value down to pleasure and pain. Only pleasure is intrinsically valuable. The only good money has in this theory is that it can bring pleasure and avoid pain. Prudential hedonism differs from value hedonism in that it understands that pursuing pleasure and avoiding pain in the short term is not always the best strategy for achieving the best long-term balance of pleasure over pain. Motivational hedonism is the theory that the desire to encounter pleasure and to avoid pain guides all of our behavior, whether that's conscious or subconscious. Normative hedonism is the theory that happiness should be pursued, morally speaking. Two main forms of this theory are hedonistic utilitarianism and hedonistic egoism. Hedonistic utilitarianism states that the correct moral action is the one that results in the greatest net happiness for everyone involved. Finally, there's hedonistic egoism, which is how we'll circle back to the satyrs and especially Xenagos. Egoism says we should do what's in our own interest. Combined with hedonism, that means it's morally correct to do whatever makes us happiest. A hedonistic egoist does not ascribe meaning to anything besides themselves, as long as that person themselves becomes happier, and that pretty much describes Xenagos. The ebook Godsend 1 introduces us to Xenagos. We follow him from being Satyr King in chapter 1 to becoming a god midway the second book, to Elspeth slaying him in the final chapter. Xenagos is one of those people who, instead of embracing new discoveries, starts moping and clinging to the familiar. He became disillusioned because he traveled beyond Theros and discovered that the gods of Theros had no power elsewhere. They didn't even exist on other planes. Xenagos takes this knowledge as a burden, unique to him only, and twists it to wanting to become a god himself. To achieve godhood, Xenagos organizes revels throughout the story. These revels have a tendency to escalate. It started small, with the trashing of an estate, but coalesced into a grand finale consisting of goading a herd of Minotaur to attack Akros. The Minotaurs were defeated and Akros was home to the biggest revel ever, where Xenagos finally ascended, becoming the god of revels with bigger, better horns. After which Elspeth and Ajani traveled to Nyx to defeat the god. As Xenagos died in Nyx, his soul didn't go to Erebos' realm, he simply stopped existing altogether. Xenagos is based on two Greek gods, Dionysus and Pan. Dionysus was the god of wine, pleasure, festivities and vegetation, but also madness and wild frenzy. Like Xenagos into Nyx, Dionysus made his ascent onto Mount Olympus, the home of the gods. He often carried a pinecone-tipped staff called a Thyrsos, just like Xenagos carried his staff. Another common attribute of Dionysus was a wreath of ivy leaves, which has been adapted into the aforementioned cult of horns. Pan, the god of shepherds, hunters, meadows and mountain forests, on the other hand, is where we get the current satyr look from. He was depicted as having horns, legs and a tail of a goat. The satyr from Greek mythology were fertility spirits that looked like balding men with horsetails and erections. We're kinda glad that part was left behind. Of course, Dionysus was also known as Bacchus. From this name we get the aforementioned Bakkeia, but also the word Bacchanal, which was used twice in the Godsend ebooks. It's the little things like this that are really enjoyable to find. We'd love it if the story of the satyrs continued in Theros Beyond Death, but sadly we didn't get much. There was a short summary on what was supposed to be the epic conclusion to Elspeth's heroic journey. The summary said nothing new about satyrs, but not all is lost. MTG Lore occasionally publishes fanfiction, and there is a story with satyrs written by a member of the community. Gallia has a role in this story too. We recommend you read it unless you have a form of emetophobia. Thank you for watching. We hope that if we return to Theros, we get some satyrs in the story again. If you enjoyed this video, give our previous one a watch. Hope you'll join us next time for more world building.